Welcome to Conversation with Calvin, We the Species. And very fascinating, interesting. It's a wow kind of interview tonight with Manu Namboodiri. We're gonna talk about water. We're gonna talk about a lot of things. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks. Fascinating, interesting. It's like my head is kind of swimming, which is a proper word because we're going to be talking about water. So my head is swimming in input and ideas. I love the internet and the whole. I say this all the time in connectivity and LinkedIn and these marvelous, wonderful tools and Zoom, because that's how I'm with Manu now. For bringing us together and my grasping what he's doing with water in India and eventually the world. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I know I'm speaking in glittering generalities, so be it, but we're going to jump into this stuff shortly. I always like to do this. The official title of this session is Manu Namboodiri. He's the founder of the Save Groundwater Foundation, which is called JalTara. Talk about that. He's also I've got 2 master's degrees. You can talk about that. And he does venture startups. He's a consultant. He's a novelist. Again, the 2 MBAs. He's computer science from Texas, Northwestern masters. There's a lot of information to unpack, including his approach to digging, and we're going to talk about this, recharge pits. It's an amazing science what he's doing. So I stay tuned, listen, and the best way is to introduce Manu. And how about a little bio, a little background, and then we'll jump into stuff. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Calvin. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and talk to your audience. Again, with your generous introduction, I don't think I need to add much more. But my name is Manu Namboodiri. I live here in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been in the U.S. for nearly 30 years now. I came here, did my master's in computer science from UT Austin, and then worked in a bunch of places. Did my MBA from Kellogg, Northwestern. I've worked in banking. I've worked at Sun Microsystems, at Microsoft, at Qualcomm. I worked in autonomous vehicles, in security, in cloud. And now what I do is I work with startups. The main thing is, how do you build a startup from scratch, this whole concept of how do you get from 0 to 1. Right? So it's a very interesting phase for any startup's career. But one of the things that occupies a lot of my mind is thinking about water, right? And that's what I do. That's my passion in some sense. I have this bug about groundwater, and I think it's maybe the most important, but maybe not highly mentioned thing when we talk about climate change, right? People talk about energy, carbon credits, all that stuff. But groundwater is not something folks talk about. And that's the thing that I believe can address a lot of challenges. So that's a little bit of who I am. And I'm very excited to be here and talk to Calvin.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to get to groundwater momentarily. Yeah. And it's funny, as we were doing our little pre-interview, we were just getting caught up. I mentioned to Manu, knowing we were going to be talking about groundwater, that water made national headlines tonight because the 3M company out in Minnesota is going to pay $10 billion to 300 separate little towns who have water issues because they make products that have spiked the water with PFAS, terrible chemicals. They're forever chemicals. They don't disappear, kind of thing. But anyway, the first burning question, and because I want to paint the picture of you, I think an amazing personality. You were telling me that, of course, you're an immigrant. You came from India, and how hard your father worked, and he, to get you 1 semester in college, correct?
Yeah, it's But when I first came here, obviously, my father gave me enough money for a semester of tuition. I came here for my master's in computer science, right? And that's not something I realized at the time. I was maybe a little bit naive or selfish, right? You can call it either way. But it's only when after I came here, I got to know that that's what my father had done. He'd kind of taken out a big chunk of his retirement fund and send it over so that I could come here and study. That realization was a bit of a wake-up call, right? And I don't think I've worked so hard in my entire life, because if by the end of that semester I did not get some sort of a scholarship, a teaching scholarship, or something that would defray my expenses, I would have to fly back, right? I would have wasted all my father's money, right? So I think that was the beginning of my life here in the US. But it also the beginning of the fantastic opportunities that this country gifts people like me who come in, and that's such a generous gift that America gave me.
Right.
But obviously, I got a scholarship, and UT Austin was very generous about that. I had a fantastic teaching scholarship, and it's a great place to study. It's one of the top computer science departments in the world, and I had the privilege of studying with some fantastic people out there. So it all worked out, and here I am.
By the way, off topic, because we said we're gonna drift, we're gonna do our groundwater, but just quickly off topic. I've been a little possessed these last few months trying to gather up as much stuff about AI as I can. In a couple of sentences, what do you think about AI? Do you like it, or do you fear it?
I think any tool is only as good as what is done with it, right? You can think of nuclear power and nuclear bombs, and all these things are there, right? There's AI is new, um, but there's massive potential in the stuff that it can do to transform our lives. Obviously a lot for the good. There's always going to be bad actors, but uh, when people ask me this because they think, like, for example, deepfakes, right? Oh, that's going to destroy us, right? There's an interesting example I read about, right? Just imagine the first time you got an email. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that email. You got mail, right? There's a clink, and everybody's rushed to open the email. Now you have a million spam messages, and you ignore everything. I think human beings have a fantastic filter that will sort stuff out
Ah,
and learn, right? What to discern, right? You can think, like, people might use AI to create a lot of content to do this and this, but I believe, right, human beings will intrinsically be able to create a spam or an AI filter that they will learn by themselves. And that's the way the world is.
okay.
You always think that something is going to trump everything else. No, that never happens, right? Evolution is too smart for that. I personally am very excited about all the things that AI can do. Uh, I'm also looking at, like, when we come to groundwater as well, right?
Yes,
What AI can do to help me speed up the stuff that I want to do on the earth, right?
that's cool.
All kinds of interesting things that can be done. So yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Okay.
Obviously there'll be pitfalls, there'll be hurdles on the way, there'll be um, you know setbacks, but that's the nature of the beast.
Okay. I just want just to tap into you a little bit.
Yeah,
Before we go into groundwater full force, one other a fascinating aspect to you that you've been to 49 states.
yeah.
That's a wow. I've been on this. I've been in this country for 7 decades. I haven't been to 49 states, not even close. How'd you do that?
Well, I think it also helps to have an adventurous wife. So I think it kind of started, right, I went to school in Texas. My first job was at Morgan Stanley in New York, right? And then I went to business school in Chicago, and then I came to the Bay Area to start my job, right? So that naturally happened. But when things really picked up is when we got two dogs,
Uh,
right? My wife and I. And we were reluctant to fly anywhere. And so we just drove everywhere. And we camped. America is a beautiful country to see by the road, right? And you don't have to go to the highways. You go to a little place, and my wife and I love those things of going in, living in nature. I would complain that she packs too much, but I get thankful when we're finally there, and she has stuff that is there, right? And then when I was working for Microsoft, my wife decided to take a master's in public policy at Carnegie Mellon. So we drove to Carnegie Mellon all the way across every single state to the East Coast, right? And when we were there, we then, traveled the breadth of East Coast, up and down. So it just and so our home was still there in Seattle, so we drove back and forth. It was just a, road tripping.
Great.
That's what we love to do, and the
That's
dogs
great.
loved it. Yeah, my wife used to say my dogs have peed in 49 of them.
That's
So
great. Okay, time for business. So I think I read that about 10 years ago, you realized that we've got water problems that need to get solved. And at that, groundwater is at the root of the.
yeah,
So can you begin to do an introduction to that?
sure, yeah. So you know, this is not something I knew at that time. Right? It was not something that struck me because groundwater is under your feet. You just don't think about it, right? Unless you're a farmer. But what actually happened is, there were droughts back in India. Right? That's one of the things. My family has farms, but we thankfully live in a part that's got plenty of water. But then when you start thinking about places that don't have water, right? And then you start reading that, groundwater accounts for about 70% of agriculture use. Right? And if you don't have groundwater and it's depleting, it's going down, farmers have to dig, 400, 500 feet now to get water. All those things started to add up for me. Other side of it, people look at surface water. We have lakes, people build dams, but dams seem to be a very inefficient way to store water because evaporation is so high. Like, for example, in California, apparently, 60% or so of the rainfall that we get evaporates. So it's the amount of water we can store starts to become very less. So it became clear to me that groundwater is in crisis, but there's a massive amount that can be stored there. The other thing that's interesting, a lot of people don't realize is of the amount of fresh water we have in the world, right? Nearly 70% is in the ice caps and snow and the mountains and all those places. 30% is groundwater, and only just about 1% is surface water.
Wow.
Right? So the amount of capacity that we have underground, under our feet, is significantly higher than what we have on the surface, right?
Wow.
I'm not saying surface water is bad, but that, if you have to solve a problem like water, groundwater seemed to be the place to do that. So that's kind of got me interested in this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of terms you started to explain it to me before we really jump in, just because what you're doing encompasses the word scale.
Yes.
We the listener here, and we the people, we the species, have to understand what scale is about. And you've actually undertaken, with the work you've done in India with groundwater, we'll talk about that. So what does scale mean? And what are the elements of scale?
Yeah.
You kind of know
No,
it.
I think that's an important conversation, I believe, whenever we talk about climate change, right? Because climate change is a global phenomenon, right? It's not something that has borders. So just thinking that you can solve something in a local place doesn't make sense. We need nation scale solutions, right? So when I started down this path, one of the things I wrote, but this is about 5 years ago, I wrote on my desk, how do I solve this for 100,000 villages? Right. And and the reason, I'll give you the reason, it's because India is the most affected by groundwater in the world. right? India extracts about 25% of the global groundwater resources, more than the next 3 or 4 countries combined. So it made sense to start from there to try to solve it. So when you put something like that out there, you want to solve it for the nation, you have to think about scale, right? Then scale becomes the problem to solve, and groundwater becomes an incidental value add in the solution of that problem, right? So I started thinking about scale, and in the Bay Area, one of the things that is fantastic in the tech world is there's a lot of thinking about scale, right? How do you scale things up? And when you boil stuff down, right, it comes down to maybe a couple of things, right? You think about scale requires simplicity, right? Whatever the solution that you make should be simple and it should be standardized. If these two things are there, then you can scale a solution. Just, there's an interesting story about Henry Ford, right? When he built the Model T, right? It's a fascinating story. There were people who were like, "Hey, Henry, can we get this car in red? Can we get it in blue?" And he had this really famous saying, right? You can get the Model T in any color that you want as long as it's black, right? He was he was very maniacally focused on standardization and scale because he knew that's how he can reduce the cost. That's how he can, push out thousands of Model Ts, off his assembly line. It's the same idea. If you start thinking about everything that we do, all the apps that we build, it's all about scale. So when I started thinking about solutions for groundwater, in my mind, I had this concept of it has to be scalable. It has to be simple. It has to be standardized. You can't have bespoke or custom solutions that depend on the geography, on the location, on that specific region, because those things, it's hard to scale. They're good projects, but they're hard to scale. So scale was a big thing that I thought about right from the beginning.
Okay. So India gets plenty of rain. We know that.
Yeah.
But they need water. So what is the root cause of the problem as we kind of develop this?
Yeah. So that's the right question, Calvin, to ask, right? What is the root cause? Because you can think about kind of surface solutions. So let me explain it in 2 ways, right? So India gets, as you said, plenty of rainfall, right? It's blessed in the sense that it gets plenty of rain, but 78% of the rainfall just flows into the ocean, right? India captures just around 6% of the rain,
Wow.
right? So how do you account for that big disparity, right? The water is just flowing away, and then so there's Elon Musk has this interesting concept, and I'm very fascinated by how he thinks, right? He talks about, and there's an old idea. He talks about how do you get to first principles, right? It's called first principles thinking. Is you don't just say, oh, just because somebody said so, that's a good solution. You ask questions that dig down to the fundamentals of how the problem can be solved. So I was inspired by that, and I said, okay, why is this happening, right? We're getting plenty of rain. Why is the water table still dropping, a lot, right? And there are plenty of reasons, but the main ones that I identified is that obviously the water is not percolating, but why is the water not percolating, right? So you go through that questions and finally end up saying that the topsoil has become very dense. Why is that? Decades of chemical fertilizer usage, right? And decades of heavy farming equipment running on top of these farms has finally just condensed the soil. It's compacted it, right? Therefore, when the rain comes, it doesn't get absorbed. The other side of it, which is also interesting with climate change, right? The weather patterns have become a lot more erratic, right? The rain that usually spreads out evenly, right? For the most part, across 2 to 3 months or so, now comes in big spurts. You get heavy rains, and then you get a long period of sunshine, then you get more rain, right? That happened in California. But just think about California. The last 4 years, we had, you can say drought-like conditions, not that good. But in January of this year, we got 2 weeks or so of heavy rain, and the entire state is flooded. So the same thing happens, and this is not a phenomenon that just happens in India or the US. It happens everywhere, right? The earth is mismanaged in some sense, right? So it becomes very dense. Therefore, water doesn't percolate down. And when heavy rains come, it just flows away, taking away topsoil, causing all kinds of havoc. So that is the root cause, if you will, of this crisis.
So you recognize this with your analytical background. You recognize this. So in 2019, you went to India.
Yeah.
And you can elaborate on this. And you dug 1,400 pits, and you're going to tell people what the pits are. They're 6 foot deep and they're 4x4. You call them a recharge pit.
Yeah.
And so explain that, what you did in 2019.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually I went there in 2019 because I was trying to find a solution for this thing, right? So my whole concept was, okay, if the earth is like concrete, how do I convert it into a sponge? Right. So that's the general concept of how I started thinking. And then the other part of scale came in, right? Scale means that you got to do the same thing everywhere, across the board, right? You standardize stuff, do it at scale. That's what kind of led me to this recharge pit. And the recharge pit is not a new idea. It's not something that I invented. It's been there for a long period of time, right? But it's mainly used in much more structured settings than what I used. But what I recognized is when I went to these villages is that they get rain, right? But the water just flows away, right? Which is because the earth is too flat. So what I decided, and at that time, Calvin, I did not know if this would work. This was just a hypothesis in my mind. I had spoken to a few geologists, and they said, we don't know, you can try it. So I said, what the heck, I'm going to try this, right? So I went to 4 villages and I said, look, I have this idea. Let's just convert your land into a sponge. So we went to every farmer and say, for every acre of land that you have, we're going to dig this recharge pit, 6 feet deep, 4x4, at the lowest point in your land, right? So this is not high tech, right? We talked to the farmer, we asked them, where's the lowest point? These guys have been working those fields for 40 years. They know that by the back, like the back of their hand. They'll tell me, this is where the lowest point is. We just dig a 6 feet deep hole, 4x4, fill it with rocks. That's it. And we wanted to do large numbers. So we did 4 villages. We got to 1,400 pits in those villages. And we're like, okay, now we are fingers crossed. Right? Let the rains come. We didn't know whether it would work. But Calvin, the results were just fantastic. Right? Right after that, I visited some of the farmers, and one farmer was so giddy, right? Because he, for the most part, when heavy rains come, the poor farmers, so these people are sustenance farmers. They might have 3 acres, 4 acres, not a whole lot of land. So when heavy rains come, their crops get spoiled because the water has nowhere to go. It just pools there and is waterlogged. So that entire land, so they lose crops. But this time, because that hole was there at the lowest point, all the water just went down. So
Wow.
suddenly, what could have been a tragic circumstance for them turned into a fantastic opportunity because they see the water coming up in the wells, right? So they say, Manu, we haven't seen the water rise up in our wells so fast with just these few rains, right? And usually when these fields are waterlogged, it takes 20 days, 15 to 20 days for the water to go away. It's either evaporates, right? It has to wait for that. So now this water has gone down within 8 to 10 hours, in some cases less than a day. Their crops are safe, they have enough water. So suddenly they got so this said, man, I'm like, okay, this hypothesis that I had about this one recharge pit per acre of land seems to work, right? So now the next step is, now how do I figure out how to scale this thing?
Yeah.
Right? Then the process comes in. So that's where, that's when I started, thinking about this.
Wow. By the way, I think it's brilliant and it's simple. I mean, this is simple
Yeah.
stuff. It's so brilliant. We did talk about the issue of groundwater and how it's not cultivated, if that's the right word, where groundwater is wasted all over the world. I mean, and so you're tackling that. I do know, and without a lot of fanfare and without a lot of publicity, that they building a lot of roof gardens in New York City to harness the rainwater, because otherwise,
Yeah.
if it goes down, it just washes away, like you said. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Javits Center, which is one of the larger exposition centers in the world, I
Yeah.
believe they have a roof garden that captures that rain and grows vegetables. Because the issue that you're dealing with, how do we harness, you
Yeah.
know, and so it's absolutely brilliant. And I'm looking at my notes. So you've done the digging of one recharge pit per acre,
Per
and
acre of land. Yeah.
yeah, and I believe over the last few years you've dug. I can't even process this. 45,000 of these things
Yeah.
in 92 villages. Uh,
That's right.
um, and we do live in a world where that issue, we can talk about that, where money comes into it and funding. How about you talk about a little bit about that, because it's
Yeah. No, I know. No, it is. Funding is obviously a part of it, but I've been, very fortunate, right, on two sides, right? One, we have a very good organization on the ground that helps me execute this thing. It's called Art of Living. They are a social kind of impact social service organization in India. And the second part is, the Manu friends and family have been very, very generous, right? In how shall I say, uh, in indulging me,
okay.
right?
Okay.
So it's essentially been that, right? And here there's an organization in California called OVPI. It's the Overseas Volunteers for a Better India. It's people like me who have come from India but want to do something good for the place they came from, and a group of volunteers. So they also generously donated. So it's been a combination of these things. But the thing that is interesting, Calvin, and maybe that's what you're getting to, is how much does it cost, right? Because if this thing is very expensive, it doesn't make. So this thing costs about $10, $10 to $12 to do one pit
Wow.
for 1 acre, right? So
Wow.
therefore, you can scale up very quickly, and you can do large areas of land, in pretty short order. So this all these, 45,000 pits, not a whole lot of money that we spent in
Oh,
order to do this thing.
wow.
Where and this is, you can think of this is, like maybe 1/10 the amount of money people spend in studying groundwater in a place like California, right? As opposed to doing stuff, right? I am studying also extremely important, but I would want people to shift more into let's just do stuff, right? Instead of waiting for the perfect solution, good enough solutions like mine can scale very quickly.
Well, I'm trying to digest this. Listen, I call it as I see it. This is so critically essential and simple and amazing. And I go like this. Wow. And how do we get the message out? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it off camera. But
Yeah, yeah,
I want to spread the word, because listen, I've been quote an environmentalist since April 22nd, 1970, when I went to the first Earth Day as a kid.
wow, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I went like this, oh my God, we have problems. And
yeah,
what I've observed over the last 53 years, sadly, nothing has changed.
yeah,
Presumably, ostensibly, presumably, all these fancy adverbs. There's not a hell of a lot has changed. We've got all our issues magnified. But you have such an amazing. It's almost as if why. So let me backtrack, um, and let me ask you this powerful question, Manu. How does all of this apply to the world?
yeah. So the way I think about this is that, so this is obviously I'm doing it in India, right? And I'm going to farmers and digging it there. But the same problem exists everywhere, right? So if you think about what's happening what happened in Paris and Italy and Spain with their groundwater stuff, right? And when the heavy rains came, how the flooding happened there. It's the exact same problem that happens across the globe. Now, are we digging one pit in every acre? Maybe not. Maybe it's two pits every hectare. I don't know, because the farm sizes might be different. But the general idea of converting earth that feels like concrete, right, and converting it into sponge where you can do stuff at scale, that is the most important thing, right? If we wait for the perfect solution, big infrastructure, like what people normally do is say, okay, we need to build dams, right, for water. California has this problem. They're talking about the new Sites Reservoir. I'm not saying building a dam is a bad idea, but that's not going to solve the problem, right? We need to look at what is going to solve the problem. California has 1000x capacity of groundwater than it has surface water. Why would we not just put water underground and do it across the state, right? Not just do it at specific locations, right? And not wait for it to be perfect, right? Some places, yeah, this little hole might not work as effectively. That's fine. But the more you do, the bigger coverage you get, the more water is going to go down, and it's cheap, right? So cheap and standardized and simple, that's the key to get to scale. Because, you know, Calvin, the thing is, we just don't have time, right? If you think about the 1.5-degree impact that's going to happen, people are saying that we've already blown past that threshold. There's no way we're going to get around that, which means that we are moving towards a hotter world. We need groundwater to save us. Like,
Yeah.
research says that if you have groundwater, that obviously improves vegetation. If there is more vegetation, surface temperatures around that region drop by 5 degrees, right, up to 5 degrees, right? So groundwater starts to become the root of almost all solutions that we can do,
Wow.
right? So this is stuff that if we start to do across the globe, right? I have this vision, right? Obviously, I want to do 50 million pits in India in 5 years, right? I would love to do 2 billion pits across the globe in 10 years. And if you think that it's only, that it's not going to be that expensive, and all it takes is digging a damn hole at the lowest point in a plot of land, filling it with rocks, and just letting it be. The other thing, I don't know if I mentioned this, is this is essentially a one-time effort, because once you dig a pit, it's not like you got to maintain it heavily, right? There's little maintenance, I'm not denying that, but that pathway, that route that takes the water underground is open. It's not like that's going to get closed after a year and you got to dig another pit. No, it's a $10 investment once, and it has multi-generational effect. The interesting thing, we hired an organization out of Geneva called Just Impact. They have offices in India to study the results of what we did, right? The water tables obviously have gone up, but the interesting thing is that the farmer incomes have gone up by 120%. Now think about, people living at the edge, right? Farmers who are struggling with water, and suddenly their incomes go up. The impact that happens in that environment is huge. For example, I don't know if you know, but the people who get impacted the most are women and children when there's no water. Because who has to go and walk kilometers to get the water to come back home? It's the women, right? And they also recruit the young kids, and therefore the young kids can't get to school, right? It starts to, poverty, according to World Bank, poverty increases by 10% when groundwater dips, or when lack of water is there. So this starts to reverse that cycle, right? People can now own animals, right? Because if you don't have water, you can't have an animal, you can't have a cow, you can't have all these things, like the knock-on effect. But once water starts to go down there, and starts to go down there every single year, all the stuff starts to reach, to reverse, right? So that's why I think groundwater, if we are able to solve groundwater across the globe quickly and rapidly, like what the JalTara idea is about, we have a chance to,
I
you
show
know,
everybody, it's hard for people
yeah,
to see. It's JalTara. I'm trying to hold it up so people, but this will be in the video.
yeah. But that is the larger vision of what I'm trying to do, is just let's try to reverse some of these things that we've gone to, um, so that we buy time, right? So the thing we have to think about is that is what is it going to be perfect? It's going to be perfect at a global scale. it might not be perfect for a single spot where the land might be slightly different, the weather patterns might be slightly different, but that's not how we should think about, right? Let's think about global optimization, not local optimization, and try to solve it at a planetary scale, at a nation scale. And that's what this whole JalTara one recharge bit per acre idea is all about.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I kind of marvel at the process of living and learning as I am, and the fact that we met and I've learned about this. And I try to stay on top of so many different climate change things and environmental things. I've done so much. I've done so much. Not enough, but I do, and I care, and I'm so conscious, and I'm just thrilled that we met, and we'll talk off camera a little bit, how I can help spread the word. We'll, and I think this is a good way to kind of end this session, because it's endless, the questions,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
but we've
But I
covered.
also want to say thank you so much, right, Calvin? This is such a fantastic opportunity to talk to you and talk about something that I get very passionate about. And you're such a generous host
Thank you.
in having me here. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, and we'll talk more off camera, but I'm inviting you to come back. Hey, we could do panels. You could bring some. It's endless. I've got a nice little pool of young Gen Z climate people. I've got some climate people all over the world.
Yeah,
We're all one species on this one.
that's right.
That's why I called my channel "We the Species." So we'll talk more about that, but please do come back.
Thank you for the invitation.
And yeah, really, and my theory is, because I'm an old timer, the more stuff you throw on a wall, the more things will stick. So we've got,
Yeah,
it'll be part my responsibility to throw this on a wall, and keep throwing it on a wall. So I'm on your team, Manu.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.